The whiskey burned Patricia Whitmore's throat as she stood behind the bar of the Silver Creek Saloon, listening to her husband tell another table of ranchers that she was as useless as a dry well in August. Thomas Whitmore had been drinking since noon, and by the time the sun began its descent over Boise, Idaho in the summer of 1878, he had shared his favorite topic with anyone who would listen: his wife's inability to give him children. Patricia's hands shook as she wiped down the wooden counter, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood, rather than the pitying looks from the patrons who had heard this speech 100 times before. 5 years married and not even a whisper of a baby, Thomas slurred, his words echoing through the establishment. What kind of woman cannot do the one thing the good Lord put her on this earth to do? I tell you, I got myself a barren wife, and she is about as worthless as teats on a boar hog. Patricia felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill, but she refused to give him the satisfaction. She had learned long ago that crying only made Thomas meaner, his words sharper, his cruelty more inventive. Instead, she focused on her work, moving bottles, counting coins, doing anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. The saloon had been her father's before he passed 2 years ago, leaving it to her with the condition that Thomas would help her run it. That had been the biggest mistake of her father's life, Patricia thought bitterly. Thomas had never lifted a finger to help with the actual work, but he certainly enjoyed drinking away the profits and using the establishment as his personal stage for humiliating his wife. A stranger walked through the swinging doors just as Thomas launched into another tirade. Patricia noticed him immediately because everyone noticed strangers in Boise, especially ones who carried themselves the way this man did. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty trail coat, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time under open skies than under roofs. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but Patricia could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Barren as the desert, Thomas continued, oblivious to the new arrival. That's what she is, barren and worthless. Should have married Mary Fletcher when I had the chance. At least she could have given me sons. The stranger walked up to the bar, and Patricia forced herself to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking shade of blue, the color of the sky just before dawn. There was something kind in those eyes, something that made her want to cry for entirely different reasons than her husband's words. "What can I get you?" she asked, proud that her voice came out steady. "Whiskey, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "And maybe some information about work in the area. Name's Benjamin Cole. I am looking for ranch work, cattle driving, breaking horses, whatever needs doing." Patricia poured him a generous measure of whiskey, her hands steadier now that she had something to focus on besides her husband's voice. "Most of the ranches around here hire in the spring. Summer's already half over, so pickings might be slim. But the Johnson Ranch about 5 miles north of town might need help. They lost a couple of hands last month to the silver mines up in the mountains." Benjamin nodded his thanks and took a sip of his whiskey. He did not gulp it down like most men did after a long ride. Instead, he savored it, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "You the owner of this establishment?" Benjamin asked. "I am," Patricia said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice despite everything. "My father built this place from nothing, left it to me when he passed." "Then you are doing a fine job," Benjamin said, and there was no flattery in his tone, just simple honesty. "Place is clean, well stocked, and the whiskey is better than most I have had in the last 3 territories." Patricia felt something warm unfold in her chest, something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was like. Appreciation, respect, simple human kindness. She opened her mouth to thank him when Thomas's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Hey, woman, bring me another bottle, and stop batting your eyes at the customers. Lord knows you are good for nothing else, but at least try to maintain some dignity." Patricia's face flamed with humiliation. She grabbed a bottle from the shelf behind her, her movements jerky with suppressed emotion. Benjamin's hand shot out and gently caught her wrist before she could move away from the bar. "Let me take that to him," Benjamin said quietly. There was something in his voice that made it not quite a suggestion. "You do not have to do that," Patricia said, but even as she spoke, she felt relief flooding through her. "I know I do not have to," Benjamin said, taking the bottle from her hands. "I want to." He walked over to Thomas's table with long, measured strides. Patricia watched with a mixture of dread and fascination as Benjamin set the bottle down in front of her husband with more force than necessary, making the glasses on the table jump. "Your wife is minding the bar," Benjamin said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet saloon. "If you want another drink, I suggest you walk over there and get it yourself like a man. Or better yet, maybe you have had enough for one day." Thomas looked up at Benjamin with bleary eyes, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? That is my wife, and I will speak to her however I damn well please." "Your wife has a name," Benjamin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level that made the other patrons shift in their seats. "And she deserves to be treated with respect, especially by the man who vowed to honor her." Thomas pushed his chair back and stood up, swaying slightly. He was several inches shorter than Benjamin and had the soft build of a man who spent more time drinking than working, but alcohol had given him false courage. "You calling me out, stranger? Because I do not take kindly to drifters coming into my town and telling me how to treat my own wife." "This is not your town," Benjamin said calmly. "And from what I have heard in the last 10 minutes, you do not have the first clue about how to treat any woman, let alone a wife who is kind enough to let you drink yourself stupid in the establishment she owns." Patricia held her breath. Thomas had gotten into fights before, usually with men too drunk to defend themselves properly. But Benjamin was stone cold sober and looked like he could handle himself in any situation. She should have been worried about violence breaking out in the saloon, but instead she felt a fierce surge of satisfaction watching someone finally stand up to Thomas. Thomas took a clumsy swing at Benjamin, who sidestepped it easily. The momentum of the missed punch sent Thomas stumbling forward, and he would have fallen flat on his face if Benjamin had not caught him by the collar of his shirt. "Go home and sleep it off," Benjamin said, giving Thomas a small shake. "And tomorrow, maybe think about apologizing to your wife for the way you have been talking about her." Thomas jerked away from Benjamin's grasp, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "This is not over," he spat. "Nobody disrespects me in my own place." "It is not your place," Patricia heard herself say. Every eye in the saloon turned to her, and she felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she forced herself to continue. "It is my saloon. My father left it to me, not you, and I am asking you to leave, Thomas. Come back when you are sober and can behave like a decent human being." The silence that followed was so complete that Patricia could hear the ticking of the clock behind the bar. Thomas stared at her as if she had sprouted a second head. In 5 years of marriage, she had never openly defied him, never contradicted him in public, never stood up for herself. She had absorbed his cruelty and his words like a sponge soaking up spilled whiskey, silent and uncomplaining. "You are going to regret this," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked around the saloon, seeing no support in the faces of the other patrons, only a mixture of approval and curiosity. Without another word, he grabbed his hat and stormed out of the saloon, slamming through the doors with enough force to make them swing wildly. Patricia's legs felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the bar to steady herself. What had she done? Thomas would make her pay for this humiliation. He always did. But even as fear crept through her, she felt something else too, a small spark of pride that she had finally stood up to him. Benjamin returned to the bar and picked up his whiskey glass. "You all right, madam?" Patricia nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it was from adrenaline rather than fear. "That took courage," Benjamin said quietly, so only she could hear. "Standing up to him like that." "I do not feel very brave," Patricia admitted. "I feel terrified." "Brave and terrified are not opposites," Benjamin said. "Sometimes they are the same thing. Courage is not about not being afraid. It is about doing what is right even when you are scared out of your mind." Patricia looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Understanding, respect, and something else, something warmer that she did not dare name. "Thank you," she said softly, "for what you did. You did not have to get involved." "Yes, I did," Benjamin said simply. "Some things a man cannot walk away from. Watching a woman being torn down by someone who should be building her up is one of them." The other patrons gradually returned to their drinks and conversations, the excitement of the confrontation fading into the normal buzz of evening at the saloon. Patricia went about her duties with renewed energy, and every time she glanced at the bar, Benjamin was there, nursing his whiskey and watching her with those steady blue eyes. As the evening wore on and the crowd thinned, Benjamin helped her clear tables without being asked. He moved with an easy efficiency that spoke of a man accustomed to hard work, stacking chairs and wiping down surfaces as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You do not have to do that," Patricia said, but she was grateful for the help. "I know," Benjamin said, echoing his earlier words, "but I want to. Besides, you have had a hard day. Least I can do is help clean up." By the time the last patron stumbled out into the night, Patricia's feet were aching and her back was sore, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She locked the front doors and turned to find Benjamin still there, waiting patiently. "I should probably get going," he said, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Is there a hotel in town, or should I look for a place to bed down in the livery?" "There is a boarding house 2 streets over," Patricia said. "Mrs. Henderson runs it. Clean rooms, decent food, and she does not charge too much. Tell her I sent you and she will treat you right." Benjamin nodded and headed for the door, but Patricia found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Will you come back tomorrow? To the saloon, I mean, if you are still in town." Benjamin turned back to her, and a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features into something almost beautiful. "Wild horses could not keep me away, madam." "Patricia," she said impulsively. "My name is Patricia." "Patricia," Benjamin repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. "That is a beautiful name. Suits you." After he left, Patricia stood in the empty saloon, touching her face where she could still feel the heat of her blush. She could not remember the last time Thomas had complimented her, could not remember the last time anyone had looked at her the way Benjamin had, as if she were something precious and worthy of protection. The walk home was short, just 3 blocks through the quiet streets of Boise, but Patricia dreaded every step. The house she shared with Thomas was a small clapboard structure that had once felt cozy, but now felt like a prison. She could see lamplight burning in the window, and knew Thomas was waiting for her. She took a deep breath and pushed open the front door. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey in front of him, and from the level of liquid remaining, he had been drinking steadily since leaving the saloon. "So the faithless wife finally comes home," Thomas said, his words only slightly slurred. He had the kind of constitution that could absorb vast quantities of alcohol without completely losing function, which Patricia had always thought was unfortunate. A man who passed out would be easier to deal with than one who stayed conscious and mean. "I had to close up the saloon," Patricia said, keeping her voice neutral. "Same as every night." "Do not play innocent with me," Thomas said, standing up so fast his chair toppled backward. "I saw the way you were looking at that stranger, eye-batting and blushing like a schoolgirl. You think I am blind. You think I do not see what is happening." "Nothing is happening," Patricia said wearily. "A customer defended me when you were being cruel, that is all, the way any decent person would." Thomas's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You made a fool of me in front of the whole town, throwing me out of the saloon like I am some common drunk. That place should be mine. You should be mine. But what do I get? A barren wife who cannot even give me children and now wants to humiliate me in public." Patricia tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me, Thomas. Or what? You will have your cowboy come rescue you. Is that your plan? You think he is going to want a used-up woman who cannot even do what nature intended?" "Please," Patricia said, hating the pleading note in her voice but unable to stop it. "You are hurting me." Thomas released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. "Get out of my sight. And tomorrow you are going to go to that saloon and apologize to me in front of everyone. You are going to tell them you were wrong and that you are sorry. Do you understand?" Patricia did not answer. She turned and walked to the small bedroom they shared, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed her arm where Thomas's fingers had left red marks that would be purple by morning. Tears finally came, but they were not tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of rage and frustration, tears for all the years she had wasted with a man who saw her as nothing more than a disappointment and a possession. She thought about Benjamin's words, brave and beautiful. When was the last time Thomas had called her beautiful? Had he ever? Even during their courtship, his compliments had been sparse and perfunctory. He had married her for the saloon, she realized now. Her father had been sick, and Thomas had seen an opportunity to get his hands on a profitable business. The marriage had been his way in, and Patricia had been too naive and too lonely to see it. But she saw it now. And she was done being blind. Morning came too soon, and with it a pounding headache that Patricia attributed to crying herself to sleep. Thomas was already gone when she rose, probably to the saloon to wait for her apology. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and even applied a touch of rouge to her pale cheeks. If today was going to be the day everything changed, she wanted to face it looking like someone who deserved respect. The saloon was empty when she arrived, which surprised her until she realized it was still early. Thomas would not show up until he had spent sufficient time telling his version of last night's events to anyone who would listen. Patricia busied herself with opening duties, sweeping the floor, checking inventory, and preparing for the day's business. She was polishing glasses when the doors swung open and Benjamin walked in. Her heart did a strange little jump in her chest, and she had to remind herself to breathe normally. "Morning," Benjamin said, removing his hat. "I hope I am not too early." "Not at all," Patricia said, setting down the glass she had been polishing. "Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "Coffee would be wonderful," Benjamin said, settling onto a stool at the bar. "And maybe some information about the Johnson Ranch." I am planning to ride out there this morning to ask about work. Patricia poured 2 cups of coffee, one for Benjamin and one for herself. She normally did not drink coffee while working, but something about Benjamin's presence made the normal rules seem less important. The Johnsons are good people, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Matthew Johnson runs the place with his 2 sons. His wife, Sarah, is one of the kindest women I know. If they have work, they will treat you fair. That is all a man can ask for, Benjamin said. He took a sip of his coffee and made an appreciative sound. You make good coffee, you make good everything from what I can tell. Patricia felt heat rising to her cheeks again. You are very kind to say so. Not kind, Benjamin said. Honest. There is a difference. He paused, his expression growing serious. How are you this morning? After last night, I mean. I worried about you walking home alone. I am fine, Patricia said automatically, then stopped. Why was she lying? Why was she minimizing what had happened? Actually, that is not true. I am not fine. Thomas was angry when I got home, and he expects me to apologize to him publicly today for embarrassing him last night. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Are you going to? No, Patricia said, and as she spoke the word, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. No, I am not. I am done apologizing for existing. I am done being treated like I am worthless just because I have not been able to give him children. I am done with all of it. Good, Benjamin said firmly. You deserve better than that. Any woman does, but especially one like you. What do you mean, one like me? Patricia asked. Benjamin looked at her steadily, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. I mean a woman who is brave enough to stand up for herself even when she is terrified. A woman who works hard and takes pride in what she does. A woman who is beautiful inside and out, even if she has been told otherwise so many times she has started to believe the lies. Patricia's breath caught in her throat. You think I am beautiful? I know you are, Benjamin said. And if your husband is too much of a fool to see it, that is his failing, not yours. Before Patricia could respond, the doors swung open again, and Thomas walked in with 3 other men behind him. Patricia recognized them as his drinking buddies, men who spent more time at the saloon than they did at their own homes or jobs. Thomas's face was set in hard lines, and Patricia knew from experience that he was gearing up for a confrontation. Well, well, Thomas said, his voice dripping with false joviality. Look at this. The stranger is back. Cannot stay away from my wife, can you? I came back for coffee and conversation, Benjamin said calmly, not rising from his stool. Both of which your wife provides excellently. My wife, Thomas repeated, emphasizing the possessive. That is right, my wife. And I think it is time you remembered that and moved along. We do not need drifters hanging around causing trouble. The only trouble I see is a man who does not appreciate what he has, Benjamin said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. Thomas's face flushed red. This is between me and my wife. You need to leave. Now. This is my saloon, Patricia said, finding her voice. And I decide who stays and who goes. Benjamin is welcome here. And Thomas, I am not apologizing to you, not today, not ever. You have spent 5 years telling me I am worthless and barren, dragging my name through the mud every chance you get. I am done. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Thomas stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the floor. You want a what? Thomas finally managed to say. A divorce, Patricia repeated, stronger this time. This marriage is over. It has been over for a long time. I just did not have the courage to admit it until now. You cannot divorce me, Thomas said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. You are my wife. This saloon is half mine. Everything you have is mine." "Actually, that is not true," Patricia said. She had spent a sleepless hour last night going over her father's will in her mind. "My father left the saloon to me in his will, with specific language that it was mine alone, not marital property. You have no legal claim to it. And as for the marriage, Idaho Territory has had legal divorce since 1864. I can file on the grounds of cruelty and habitual intemperance, both of which you have displayed repeatedly." Thomas took a step toward her, his fists clenched, but Benjamin was off his stool and between them before Thomas could take another breath. "I would not," Benjamin said quietly. "You have already shown everyone what kind of man you are. Do not make it worse." "You are behind this," Thomas said, jabbing a finger at Benjamin. "You come into town and within 24 hours you are trying to steal my wife." "Nobody can steal something that does not belong to you," Benjamin said. "And a wife is not property. Patricia is making her own choices. You should respect that." "Respect," Thomas laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "I will tell you what I respect. I respect the fact that she is going to be a laughingstock when everyone finds out she drove away her husband to chase after some saddle tramp who will be gone by the end of the week." "I will be here as long as Patricia wants me to be," Benjamin said. "And for the record, I am not some saddle tramp. I worked for the last 5 years as foreman on the Running M Ranch down in Nevada Territory. I can provide references if anyone cares to ask. I came to Idaho looking for a change and maybe a place to settle down. Turns out I might have found it." Patricia's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was happening too fast, spinning out of control, but at the same time, it felt right. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living her own life instead of just surviving someone else's. "Get out," she said to Thomas. "Get out of my saloon and do not come back. If you want to discuss the divorce, you can talk to a lawyer. But you and I are done talking." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the wheels turning in his head. He was calculating, trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation, to maintain control. But the presence of Benjamin, the determination in Patricia's voice, and the uncomfortable shuffling of his friends all told him the same thing. He had lost. "You will regret this," Thomas said finally. "When he leaves and you are alone, you will regret throwing me away." "The only thing I regret is not doing this years ago," Patricia said. Thomas turned on his heel and stormed out, his friends trailing after him like confused ducklings. As soon as the doors stopped swinging, Patricia felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the bar to steady herself, and Benjamin was immediately at her side, his hand gentle on her back. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so," Patricia said. "I think I am better than all right. I think I just took my life back." Benjamin smiled. "You did. And it was magnificent to watch." Patricia looked up at him, and suddenly she was very aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand on her back, of the way his eyes seemed to hold entire universes of kindness. "I meant what I said about the divorce. I am going to file the papers as soon as I can get to a lawyer." "I know you did," Benjamin said, "and I meant what I said about staying if you want me to." "I do want you to," Patricia said softly, "but Benjamin, you should know that what Thomas said about me is true. I have been married for 5 years and I never conceived. I probably cannot have children. If that matters to you, if that changes how you see me, I would rather know now." Benjamin's hand moved from her back to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Patricia, whether or not you can have children has nothing to do with your worth as a person. And for the record, there are a lot of reasons why a woman might not conceive. Maybe it was not you, maybe it was him, but either way, it does not matter to me. What matters is who you are, the strength you have shown, the kindness despite all the cruelty you have endured. That is what I see when I look at you." Patricia felt tears welling up, but this time they were good tears, healing tears. "I do not even know you. We just met yesterday. This is all happening so fast." "I know," Benjamin said, "and I am not asking you to make any promises or decisions right now. I am just asking if I can stay in Boys for a while, get to know you properly, let you get to know me, see where things go. Can we do that?" Patricia nodded, not trusting her voice. Benjamin smiled and gently wiped away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. "Good," he said. "Now I am going to ride out to the Johnson Ranch and see about that work, and when I come back this evening, maybe you will have dinner with me. Nothing fancy, just a meal and some conversation. What do you say?" "I would like that," Patricia said. "I would like that very much." Benjamin left shortly after, and Patricia spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of running the saloon while her mind spun with everything that had happened. Word of the confrontation spread through Boys like wildfire, and Patricia found herself on the receiving end of more sympathetic looks and quiet words of support than she had expected. Apparently, Thomas's habit of publicly humiliating his wife had not gone unnoticed, and many people were glad to see Patricia finally standing up for herself. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stopped by in the afternoon with a basket of fresh bread. "I heard what happened," she said, pressing the basket into Patricia's hands, "and I want you to know that I think you are doing the right thing. That man never deserved you." "Thank you," Patricia said, overwhelmed by the kindness. "That means more than you know." "That young man staying at my place, Benjamin," Mrs. Henderson continued. "He is a good one, I can always tell. He is polite, paid up front for a week, and he has a kind word for everyone. You could do a lot worse." Patricia felt her cheeks heating again. "We only just met." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. "I knew my Henry was the one for me within an hour of meeting him. We had 42 good years together before the Lord called him home. When you know, you know." After Mrs. Henderson left, Patricia thought about those words. When you know, you know. Did she know? Was it possible to feel such a strong connection to someone she had only known for 24 hours? It seemed insane, irrational, the kind of thing she would have scoffed at if she had read it in one of the romantic novels she sometimes borrowed from the lending library. But it did not feel insane. It felt like waking up after a long, exhausting sleep. It felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Benjamin returned just as Patricia was preparing to close up for the evening. He had cleaned up from his ride, washing away the trail dust and changing into a fresh shirt, and Patricia's heart did that strange little jump again at the sight of him. "Good news," Benjamin said, his face bright with satisfaction. "Matthew Johnson hired me on. I start tomorrow. It is good pay, and he has a small cabin on the property where I can stay. I will be working mostly with the horses, breaking and training them, which is what I am best at." "That is wonderful," Patricia said, genuinely happy for him. "I told you the Johnsons were good people." "You were right," Benjamin said. "Sarah Johnson also insisted I tell you that you are invited to Sunday dinner this week. Apparently, word has spread about what happened, and she wants you to know you have friends who support you." Patricia felt a lump forming in her throat. "Everyone has been so kind today. I did not expect it." "People are not blind," Benjamin said. "They have seen how Thomas treated you. They are glad you are finally free of him." He paused, then held out his arm. "Now I believe I promised you dinner. The hotel has a dining room that is supposed to serve a decent meal. Will you join me?" Patricia hesitated for just a moment, thinking about propriety and what people might say, and then decided she did not care. She had already blown up her life today. She might as well enjoy the aftermath. She took Benjamin's arm, locked up the saloon, and let him lead her through the streets of Boise to the hotel. The dining room was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a warm glow over everything. Benjamin pulled out Patricia's chair for her, a small gesture that made her feel cherished in a way she had not experienced in years. They ordered the evening special, which turned out to be roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, and as they waited for their food, they talked. Patricia found herself telling Benjamin things she had never told anyone. About her childhood as an only child, how her mother had died when she was young, how her father had raised her with a combination of gruff affection and high expectations, how she had learned to run the saloon by watching him, absorbing everything from bookkeeping to dealing with difficult customers, how lonely she had been after her father's death, which had made her vulnerable to Thomas's courtship. He was not always cruel, Patricia said, pushing a piece of carrot around her plate. At first he was charming, attentive. He said all the right things, but after we got married it was like a mask slipped off. The real Thomas emerged and he was nothing like the man I thought I had married. I am sorry you went through that, Benjamin said, but I am glad you got out. Some people never find the strength to leave, even when they know they should. What about you? Patricia asked. You know my sad story. What is yours? Why did you leave Nevada and come to Idaho? Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his expression growing distant. I lost someone, he said finally. Her name was Sarah and she was going to be my wife. We had been engaged for 6 months, planning our wedding, planning our future. Then she got sick, fever. It came on fast, and there was nothing the doctor could do. She was gone in 3 days. Patricia reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I am so sorry. It was 2 years ago, Benjamin said, and I thought I would never want to look at another woman again. I threw myself into work, spent every waking hour in the saddle or breaking horses, anything to keep from thinking. But eventually, I realized that was not living. That was just existing. Sarah would not have wanted that for me. She would have wanted me to move on to find happiness again. So I decided to make a fresh start somewhere new, and here I am. Here you are, Patricia echoed softly. She thought about how much courage it must have taken for him to open his heart again after such a loss, and she felt humbled. Your Sarah sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was, Benjamin said, and I think she would have liked you. You remind me of her in some ways. The same strength, the same determination not to let life beat you down. They talked late into the evening, long after their plates had been cleared away and the other diners had left. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and laughing at stories from their respective pasts. Patricia could not remember the last time she had laughed so much, so freely, without worrying about saying the wrong thing or accidentally triggering Thomas's temper. When Benjamin finally walked her home, the moon was high and the streets were quiet. They stopped outside Patricia's house, and she felt a flutter of anxiety about what came next. I should probably find somewhere else to live, she said. This house technically belongs to Thomas. His name is on the deed. I just never thought about it before because I assumed we would always be together. You have anywhere you can go? Benjamin asked, concern evident in his voice. Patricia thought for a moment. There are rooms above the saloon. They are small and have not been used in years, but they are structurally sound. I could clean one out, move some furniture in. It would work temporarily, until I figure out something more permanent. I will help you, Benjamin offered immediately. Tomorrow's Sunday, and I do not start at the Johnson Ranch until Monday. We can spend the day fixing up the room for you. You do not have to do that, Patricia said, but she was grateful for the offer. I know I do not have to, Benjamin said with a smile. But we have already established that I do a lot of things I do not have to do just because I want to. So let me help you, please." Patricia nodded. "All right, thank you." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Benjamin reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her pins behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You are remarkable, Patricia Whitmore," he said softly, "and I am very glad I wandered into your saloon yesterday." "So am I," Patricia whispered. Benjamin leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, but Patricia did not want to. She wanted this, wanted to know what it felt like to be kissed by someone who saw her as brave and beautiful instead of barren and worthless. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that sent warmth flooding through Patricia's entire body. It was nothing like kissing Thomas, which had always felt perfunctory and obligatory. This felt like coming home, like finding something precious she had not even known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing a little harder. Benjamin rested his forehead against hers, and Patricia could feel him smiling. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "Big day tomorrow." "Big day tomorrow," Patricia agreed, though she did not want him to leave. She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall figure gradually disappearing from view, and then she let herself into the house. Thomas was not there, which was a relief. Patricia packed a small bag with her essential belongings, things she would need if she was going to stay at the saloon. She changed into her nightgown but did not bother getting into bed. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the moon track across the sky, thinking about everything that had changed in the space of 48 hours. She had demanded a divorce. She had kissed another man. She was planning to move out of her house. Any one of those things would have seemed impossible a week ago, but now they all felt inevitable, like dominoes falling in exactly the pattern they were always meant to follow. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window, and Patricia rose feeling more rested than she had in months, despite having slept in a chair. She washed and dressed quickly, then gathered her bag and left the house without a backward glance. Whatever happened next, she knew she would not be returning here. Benjamin was waiting for her at the saloon when she arrived, and true to his word, he spent the entire day helping her clean and prepare one of the upstairs rooms. They swept out years of dust, washed windows until they gleamed, and hauled furniture up from storage. By late afternoon, the room looked almost cozy, with a bed, a wardrobe, a small table with 2 chairs, and even some cheerful curtains that Patricia had found in a trunk. "It is perfect," Patricia said, looking around with satisfaction. "Thank you for helping me." "It was my pleasure," Benjamin said. He was dusty and sweaty from the work, but he was smiling. "Now you have your own space, somewhere you can be yourself without worrying about anyone else." They went downstairs to open the saloon for the evening, and Patricia was surprised to find a crowd already gathering outside. As she unlocked the doors, she realized that half the town had turned out, not just for drinks but to show their support. People she had known for years came up to her with words of encouragement, with offers of help, with stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Sarah Johnson was there with her husband Matthew, and she pulled Patricia into a warm embrace. "You are so brave," she said. "I know this cannot be easy, but you are doing the right thing." "Thank you," Patricia said, overwhelmed, "and thank you for the dinner invitation." "Of course," Sarah said, "you are always welcome at our table. And I want you to know that if you need anything, anything at all, you just have to ask." Matthew Johnson shook Benjamin's hand. "Glad to have you starting tomorrow. Patricia spoke highly of you, and after hearing about what you did for her, I am even more pleased we are taking you on." The evening passed in a blur of friendly faces and supportive words. Patricia felt like she was floating, buoyed by the kindness of her community. Thomas did not make an appearance, which was a relief, and by the time the last customer left and Patricia locked the doors, she was exhausted but happy. Benjamin had stayed to help clean up, and now he lingered by the door, clearly reluctant to leave. "You are going to be all right tonight?" he asked. "Up there by yourself?" "I will be fine," Patricia assured him. "Better than fine, actually. I will be free." Benjamin smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "Sleep well, Patricia. I will see you tomorrow evening when I finish work." After he left, Patricia climbed the stairs to her new room and got ready for bed. The mattress was a little lumpy, and the room was smaller than what she was used to. But as she lay down and pulled the covers up to her chin, she felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in 5 long years. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Patricia ran the saloon during the day, and Benjamin came by every evening after finishing his work at the Johnson Ranch. Sometimes they had dinner together, sometimes they just talked, and sometimes they sat in companionable silence while Patricia did her bookkeeping and Benjamin read the newspaper. It was domestic and comfortable, and everything Patricia had thought marriage should be but never was. Benjamin was patient, never pushing for more than Patricia was ready to give, but the attraction between them grew stronger with each passing day. Patricia found herself thinking about him constantly, anticipating his arrival, feeling incomplete when he was not there. And from the way he looked at her, she knew he felt the same way. 3 weeks after Thomas had moved out, Patricia received a visit from a lawyer named Edmund Morris, a serious man in his 50s who had an office on Main Street. She had contacted him about filing for divorce, and he had agreed to take her case. "I have reviewed your father's will and the circumstances of your marriage," Mr. Morris said, sitting across from Patricia in the saloon. "I believe we have a strong case for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and habitual drunkenness. The fact that multiple people have witnessed your husband's behavior will work in your favor. However, I should warn you that Thomas has also retained a lawyer, and they are threatening to contest the divorce." "On what grounds?" Patricia asked, her stomach sinking. "They are claiming that you have been unfaithful, that your relationship with Benjamin Cole constitutes adultery," Mr. Morris said. "Now, I do not believe they have any actual evidence of this, but they may try to use the fact that you have been seen together frequently to create doubt about your character." Patricia felt anger rising in her chest. "Benjamin and I have done nothing wrong. We have not been intimate. He has been a perfect gentleman." "I believe you," Mr. Morris said. "But in divorce proceedings, perception can be as important as reality. My advice is to be cautious about public displays of affection until the divorce is finalized. I know that is not fair, but it will protect you legally." Patricia nodded, understanding the wisdom of his words even as she resented the need for them. "How long will the process take?" "If Thomas agrees to the divorce, it could be finalized in a matter of weeks. If he contests it, we could be looking at several months," Mr. Morris said. "But I am confident we will prevail. Your case is strong." After the lawyer left, Patricia sat alone in the saloon, feeling the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She hated that she had to be careful about spending time with Benjamin, hated that her legitimate desire to end a bad marriage was being twisted into something sordid by Thomas's legal maneuvering. Benjamin arrived that evening to find Patricia unusually quiet. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Patricia told him about her conversation with the lawyer, and Benjamin's expression darkened. "So Thomas is trying to make you the villain in this story. Of course he is. He cannot accept any responsibility for his own actions. Mr. Morris suggested we should be more careful about being seen together until the divorce is finalized," Patricia said miserably. I hate it, but I understand why. I cannot give Thomas any ammunition to use against me." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, and Patricia could see him thinking, processing. "Then maybe we should not be seen together," he said slowly. Patricia felt her heart drop. "You want to stop visiting?" "No," Benjamin said quickly, taking her hands in his. "No, that is not what I meant at all. I meant maybe we should not be seen together in town. But what if I saw you somewhere else? Somewhere private, where Thomas and his lawyer could not use it against you." "Where?" Patricia asked, confused. "The Johnson Ranch," Benjamin said. "It is 5 miles out of town. Matthew and Sarah have already invited you to Sunday dinner. What if you started accepting that invitation? You could come out on Sundays, spend the day, and no one in town would think anything of it. You would just be visiting friends. And while you were there, you and I could spend time together without worrying about gossip or lawyers." Patricia considered this. It was a clever solution, one that would allow them to continue building their relationship while protecting her legally. "You do not think the Johnsons would mind?" "I think Sarah would be delighted," Benjamin said with a small smile. "She has been asking me about you constantly, wanting to know if we are courting. I think she is something of a romantic." "All right," Patricia said, feeling her spirits lift. "I will go to dinner this Sunday." The days until Sunday felt interminable, but finally, the morning arrived bright and clear. Patricia closed the saloon for the day, something she rarely did, and borrowed a horse from the livery stable. The ride out to the Johnson Ranch was beautiful, with wildflowers blooming along the trail and mountains rising in the distance. The Johnson Ranch was a sprawling operation with a large main house, several barns, and numerous corrals filled with horses in various stages of training. Sarah Johnson came out to meet Patricia as she rode up, her face wreathed in smiles. "I am so glad you could come," Sarah said, helping Patricia down from her horse. "Benjamin has told us so much about you, and I have been dying to get to know you better." Patricia liked Sarah immediately. She was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and an easy manner that put people at ease. She linked her arm through Patricia's and led her into the house, chattering about the meal she had prepared and how happy she was to have company. Dinner was a lively affair with Sarah, Matthew, their 2 grown sons, and Benjamin all crowded around the table. The food was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Patricia found herself laughing at stories about mishaps with stubborn horses and joining in discussions about the best way to train young colts. It felt like being part of a family, something she had not experienced since her father was alive. After dinner, Benjamin asked if Patricia would like to see the horses he had been working with, and Sarah practically pushed them out the door with a knowing smile. They walked out to the corrals, where several beautiful horses grazed peacefully. "That is my current project," Benjamin said, pointing to a striking paint horse with a wild look in its eyes. "His name is Thunder, and he is living up to it. Bucked me off twice last week." "He is beautiful," Patricia said, admiring the horse's coat. "He is," Benjamin agreed. "And he will be a fine animal once he learns to trust. He was mistreated by his previous owner, so now he thinks every human is going to hurt him. It takes time and patience to convince him otherwise." Patricia thought about how similar she and that horse were, both learning to trust again after being hurt. She looked at Benjamin, at his strong profile silhouetted against the afternoon sun, and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost took her breath away. "Benjamin," she said softly, and he turned to look at her. "Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding that I need time." "You are worth waiting for," Benjamin said simply, "however long it takes." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the ranch, with Benjamin showing her all the work he had been doing. He talked about his plans for expanding the training program, about his dream of eventually owning his own ranch someday. Patricia found herself caught up in his vision, imagining a future where they built something together. As the sun began to set and Patricia prepared to ride back to town, Sarah pulled her aside. "He is a good man," she said quietly, "and he cares for you very much. Anyone with eyes can see it." "I care for him too," Patricia admitted. "More than I probably should, given that I am still technically married to someone else." "Your marriage to Thomas was over long before you met Benjamin," Sarah said gently. "Do not let guilt stop you from accepting happiness when it is offered. Lord knows life is too short and too hard to turn away from love when you find it." Patricia hugged Sarah gratefully and rode back to Boys as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. She felt lighter, more hopeful than she had in weeks. The divorce might take time, but eventually it would happen. And when it did, she and Benjamin could move forward without any shadows hanging over them. The weeks passed slowly, each Sunday bringing Patricia back to the Johnson Ranch and into Benjamin's company. They grew closer with each visit, sharing secrets and dreams, stealing kisses when they were sure no one was watching. Benjamin told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the parents he had lost to cholera when he was 16, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch before finding his place in Nevada. Patricia told him about the loneliness of her marriage, about the way Thomas had slowly eroded her self-worth with his constant criticisms, about the joy she felt now in running the saloon on her own terms. In town, the legal proceedings dragged on. Thomas was indeed contesting the divorce, just as his lawyer had threatened, dragging out the process and making everything as difficult as possible. But Patricia had Mr. Morris on her side, and he was a tenacious advocate. He gathered testimony from dozens of Boys' residents who had witnessed Thomas's drunken tirades and cruel treatment of his wife. The evidence against Thomas was overwhelming, and even his own lawyer seemed discouraged by the weakness of their position. It was early October, nearly 3 months after Patricia had first asked for a divorce, when Mr. Morris arrived at the saloon with news that made Patricia's heart soar. "The judge has granted your petition," he said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. "Your marriage to Thomas Whitmore is officially dissolved. You are a free woman, Patricia." Patricia felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy and relief. "It is really over. It is really over," Mr. Morris confirmed. "The judge ruled in your favor on every count. Thomas has no claim to the saloon or any of your other property. He has also been ordered to stay away from you and not to contact you directly. If he violates that order, he will be subject to arrest." After Mr. Morris left, Patricia sat alone in the saloon, letting the reality of her freedom wash over her. She was divorced. She was free. She could build whatever life she wanted without fear or constraint. And she knew exactly what kind of life she wanted to build and with whom she wanted to build it. That evening, when Benjamin arrived at the saloon, Patricia met him at the door with a kiss that left them both breathless. "It is over," she said when they finally pulled apart. "The divorce is final. I am free." Benjamin's face lit up with a joy that mirrored her own. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. "I am so glad," he said, setting her down but not letting her go. "So incredibly glad." "I know we have only known each other for a few months," Patricia said, her hands resting on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. "But I know what I want, Benjamin. I want you. I want a life with you. I want to build something real and lasting with someone who sees me as an equal, as a partner, not as property or a disappointment." "I want that too," Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Patricia, I have wanted that since the first day I met you. I love you." I know I should probably wait, court you properly, but I cannot keep it in anymore. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you every single day." "I love you too," Patricia said, and saying the words felt like breaking through the surface of water after being submerged for years. "I love you so much it terrifies me." They stood there in the empty saloon, holding each other as the evening light faded outside and the oil lamps cast warm shadows on the walls. Patricia felt like her heart was so full it might burst. After so many years of being told she was worthless, after so many nights lying awake wondering if she deserved the cruelty Thomas heaped upon her, she had finally found someone who saw her true worth. Someone who loved her not despite her flaws, but because of her strength, her courage, her ability to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. "Marry me," Benjamin said suddenly, pulling back to look into her eyes. "I know it is too soon, I know we should wait, but Patricia, I do not want to wait. I have already lost so much time to grief and sorrow. I do not want to lose another minute that I could be spending as your husband. Marry me, please." Patricia felt her breath catch. It was too soon. They had only known each other for 3 months. People would talk, would say she had jumped from one marriage straight into another without taking time to heal. But she did not care what people said. She knew her own heart, and her heart was telling her that Benjamin Cole was the man she was meant to be with. "Yes," she said, laughing through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin kissed her again, and this time there was a promise in it, a commitment that went beyond words. They would build a life together, face whatever challenges came their way as partners, as equals, as two people who had found something precious and rare, and were determined never to let it go. They decided to wait until spring for the wedding, partly to give themselves time to plan properly and partly to let the gossip about Patricia's divorce die down. Patricia did not want her marriage to Benjamin tainted by whispers about unseemly haste or questions about propriety. She wanted it to be a celebration, pure and joyful, with no shadows from the past lurking in the corners. Winter in Boise was cold but beautiful, with snow blanketing the streets and ice forming fantastic patterns on the windows. Patricia and Benjamin spent the long winter evenings planning their future. Benjamin had been saving money for years, and combined with the profits from the saloon, they had enough to think about expanding. They talked about building a small ranch adjacent to the Johnson property, where Benjamin could continue his horse training work while also running cattle. Patricia would keep the saloon, hiring someone to help manage it so she would not be tied there every night. Sarah Johnson threw herself into helping plan the wedding with the enthusiasm of someone who loved any excuse for a celebration. She helped Patricia choose fabric for a dress, suggested flowers, and offered the Johnson Ranch as a location for the ceremony and reception. "It will be perfect," Sarah insisted. "We will have the ceremony outside, weather permitting, with the mountains as your backdrop, and we can have the reception in the barn. We will clean it out and decorate it until it looks like something out of a fairy tale." Patricia was overwhelmed by Sarah's generosity, and by the way the whole Johnson family had embraced her as one of their own. Matthew and his sons treated Benjamin like a beloved brother, and they extended that same warmth to Patricia. It was the family she had always wanted but never had, and she felt grateful beyond words. Thomas had left Boise shortly after the divorce was finalized, heading south to Arizona Territory, where he had a brother. Patricia had heard through the grapevine that he was spreading stories about how his wife had betrayed him, but most people who heard those stories knew the truth and dismissed them as the bitter ravings of a man who had lost everything through his own cruelty. Patricia felt no satisfaction in his departure, only relief that she would not have to worry about running into him on the street or dealing with his attempts to undermine her business. As winter gave way to spring, the whole town seemed to be caught up in the anticipation of the wedding. The women of Boys organized a quilting bee and created a beautiful wedding quilt as a gift. The men at the saloon passed around a hat and collected enough money to buy Patricia and Benjamin a pair of fine breeding horses as a wedding present. Even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house got involved, insisting on making the wedding cake herself. The wedding took place on a perfect May morning in 1879, with blue skies and warm sunshine that felt like a benediction. Patricia wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Sarah had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to Patricia's mother. Benjamin wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaven. And when Patricia walked toward him through the wildflowers that carpeted the Johnson property, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, conducted by the Methodist minister from Boys. Patricia and Benjamin exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other, to be partners in all things, to face whatever challenges life brought with courage and faith. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed Patricia with such tender passion that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was everything Sarah had promised, with the barn transformed into a magical space full of flowers and lanterns. There was music and dancing, and more food than Patricia had ever seen in one place. People ate and drank and laughed, celebrating not just a wedding but a new beginning for two people who had both known loss and pain and were now choosing joy. As the evening drew to a close and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Benjamin led Patricia away from the party to a small cabin that stood at the edge of the Johnson property. It had been empty for years, but Matthew had given it to them as a wedding present, and they had spent the last few months fixing it up as their first home together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," Benjamin said, carrying Patricia over the threshold in the traditional manner. "Mrs. Cole," Patricia repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that." Benjamin set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "You are the most beautiful, brave, incredible woman I have ever known. And I am the luckiest man alive because you chose to spend your life with me." "I am the lucky one," Patricia said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with her fingers. "You saw me when I was at my lowest point, when I had almost convinced myself that I was exactly what Thomas said I was. But you looked at me and saw something worth saving, something worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Benjamin said. "You just needed someone with eyes clear enough to see it." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of two people who had waited for each other, who had found each other against all odds, and were determined to cherish what they had built together. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, talking in whispers and making plans for their future. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Patricia's life. She and Benjamin settled into their cabin and began building their ranch, starting small with just a few head of cattle and focusing primarily on Benjamin's horse training business. Word of his skills spread quickly, and soon people were bringing horses from all over Idaho Territory for him to work with. Patricia continued to run the saloon, but she hired a manager to handle the evening shifts so she could spend her nights at home with her husband. Life was not without its challenges. Building a ranch from scratch was hard work, and there were times when Patricia wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But Benjamin was always there, steady and supportive, helping her see solutions instead of just problems. And Patricia discovered that she loved the physical work of ranch life, loved caring for animals and watching things grow. It was nearly a year after their wedding when Patricia began to suspect that something had changed. She felt tired all the time, queasy in the mornings, and her monthly courses had stopped. At first, she refused to let herself hope, remembering all the years with Thomas when hope had led only to disappointment. But as the weeks passed and the signs became unmistakable, she finally allowed herself to believe the impossible. She was pregnant. Patricia waited until she was absolutely certain before telling Benjamin. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. Benjamin had his arm around her shoulders, and Patricia felt safe and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. "Benjamin," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, his voice warm with contentment. "I am going to have a baby," Patricia said. "We are going to have a baby." Benjamin went absolutely still for a moment, and Patricia felt a flutter of anxiety. What if this changed things? What if he had only said he did not care about children because he thought it would never be an issue? But then Benjamin let out a whoop of joy so loud it startled the horses in the nearby corral. He picked Patricia up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Patricia, this is the most wonderful news in the world. You are happy?" Patricia asked, even though the answer was obvious from the tears streaming down his face. "Happy. I am beyond happy. I am blessed. I am grateful. I am so many things I do not even have words for them all," Benjamin said. He set her down carefully, as if she were made of the finest china, and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Patricia, you are a miracle." "So Thomas was wrong," Patricia said, her own tears flowing freely now. "I am not barren, I am not worthless." "Thomas was always wrong," Benjamin said fiercely. "About everything. You are the most valuable, precious, important person in my world. And now we are going to bring a new life into this world. A child who will be raised with love and respect, and all the things we both wished we had more of. This baby is so lucky to have you as a mother." Patricia leaned into Benjamin's embrace, feeling the weight of years of shame and self-doubt finally lifting from her shoulders. She was not broken. She was not defective. She was simply a woman who had been with the wrong man, and now she was with the right one, and everything was falling into place exactly as it was meant to. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Patricia feeling better as the initial nausea faded and her energy returned. She continued to work at the saloon and help with the ranch, though Benjamin insisted she not overdo it. Sarah Johnson was thrilled at the news and immediately began knitting tiny blankets and gowns for the baby. The whole community seemed invested in the pregnancy. With women Patricia barely knew stopping her on the street to offer advice and well wishes. As Patricia's belly grew round and full, she found herself thinking often about Thomas and about the years she had spent believing his lies. She wondered if there had been some truth to what Mr. Morris had suggested during the divorce proceedings, that maybe Thomas had been the one with the problem, not her. But it did not matter anymore. What mattered was the future, not the past, and the future was growing inside her, kicking and tumbling and making its presence known. On a cold February morning in 1880, Patricia's labor began. Benjamin rode like the wind to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Anderson, an experienced woman who had delivered half the babies and boys over the last 20 years. Sarah Johnson came too, refusing to let Patricia go through this alone, and between the two women, Patricia felt safe and cared for even as the pain intensified. Labor was hard, longer and more difficult than Patricia had expected, but she drew strength from Benjamin's presence. He held her hand through every contraction, murmured encouragement when she thought she could not go on, and never once left her side despite Mrs. Anderson's suggestion that he might be more comfortable waiting outside. Finally, after nearly 12 hours of labor, Patricia heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the strong, healthy cry of her newborn baby. Mrs. Anderson wrapped the infant in a soft blanket and placed the bundle in Patricia's arms. "It is a boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A fine, healthy boy." Patricia looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and his shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He was beautiful. He was perfect. He was hers. "Our son," Benjamin said, his voice choked with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both Patricia and the baby. "Our boy. Patricia, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Patricia asked, unable to take her eyes off her son's face. Benjamin thought for a moment. "What about Samuel? It means God has heard." "It seems appropriate, given that this little one is an answer to prayers I did not even know I was saying." "Samuel Cole," Patricia said, testing out the name. "I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world, little one." The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but Patricia had never been happier. Benjamin was a devoted father, getting up in the middle of the night to help with feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding Samuel and marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch. Patricia watched her husband fall in love with their son, and her own love for Benjamin deepened even further. Sarah Johnson and the other women of Boys took turns bringing meals and helping with household chores, giving Patricia time to rest and recover. The saloon manager proved more than capable of running things on his own, and Patricia found she did not miss the daily grind of bartending and bookkeeping. Her world had shifted, narrowing to focus on the tiny miracle in her arms, and she was content with that. As Samuel grew from an infant into a chubby, happy baby, the ranch continued to grow as well. Benjamin's reputation as a horse trainer brought in steady income, and they were able to buy more land and expand their cattle herd. Patricia eventually sold the saloon, deciding that she wanted to focus her energy on the ranch and her family. The sale brought in enough money to build a larger house, one with room for Samuel to grow and explore. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their cattle herd, winters that were brutally cold, and illnesses that swept through the community. But Patricia and Benjamin faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good ones. And there were so many good times. Samuel's first steps, his first words, the day he helped Benjamin feed the horses for the first time. When Samuel was 3, Patricia became pregnant again, and this time she felt none of the fear and doubt that had plagued her first pregnancy. She knew her body was capable of this miracle, knew that she and Benjamin would welcome this new child with the same love they had for Samuel. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a warm summer evening, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Anderson barely made it in time for the delivery. "A sister for Samuel," Benjamin said, cradling his daughter with the same tender awe he had shown his son. "Our family is complete." But life had one more surprise in store. 2 years after Emma's birth, Patricia discovered she was pregnant for a third time. Their youngest son, James, was born in the spring of 1886, completing the family that Patricia had once believed she could never have. As the years passed, Patricia sometimes thought about Thomas Whitmore and the poison he had spread about her being barren and worthless. She heard through occasional travelers that he had remarried in Arizona, to a woman much younger than himself, and that he continued to drink heavily and blame the world for his problems. Patricia felt no anger toward him anymore, only a distant pity for a man who had been given something precious, and had thrown it away through his own cruelty and weakness. She thought about the woman she had been in that boy's saloon, listening to her husband tear her down night after night, believing that she deserved his contempt. And she thought about the cowboy who had walked through the doors one summer evening and changed everything, who had looked at her with clear eyes and seen not barren and worthless, but brave and beautiful. Benjamin had given her so much more than love and children. He had given her back herself, had helped her rediscover the strong, capable woman who had always been there underneath the layers of shame and self-doubt. Together they had built something real and lasting, a ranch that prospered, a family that thrived, and a love that deepened with every passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Patricia to the spot where they had been married, on the Johnson Ranch with the mountains rising in the distance. The Johnsons were still there, a little older and grayer but still as warm and welcoming as ever. Sarah had prepared a special meal, and after they ate, Benjamin pulled Patricia aside for a private walk through the wildflowers that still bloomed every spring. "I wanted to come back here," Benjamin said, holding Patricia's hand as they walked, "because this is where we promised to build a life together. And I wanted to tell you that you have made every one of those 10 years better than I ever imagined possible." "You did the same for me," Patricia said. "You saved me, Benjamin. You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I thought I was worthless. You gave me everything I thought I could never have." "We saved each other," Benjamin corrected gently. "I was lost when I came to boys, still carrying grief I did not know how to set down. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to believe that happiness was still possible. You brought light back into my life." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the mountains just as they had on their wedding night, and Patricia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The pain of her first marriage had been real. The years of humiliation and belittlement had left scars that would probably never completely fade. But those experiences had also made her appreciate what she had now, had taught her the difference between a man who tears down and a man who builds up. Samuel, Emma, and James were waiting for them back at the cabin, probably getting into some mischief under the watchful eye of the teenage girl they had hired to help around the house. Patricia and Benjamin would return to them soon, to the beautiful chaos of family life, to bedtime stories and scraped knees, and all the small dramas and joys of raising children. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy and the saloon owner who had found each other against all odds. Two people who had been brave enough to reach for happiness even when the world tried to convince them they did not deserve it. "I love you, Patricia Cole," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "I love you too, Benjamin Cole," Patricia replied, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Always and forever." And as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear one by one, Patricia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. She was not barren or worthless. She was brave and beautiful and loved, and she had 3 beautiful children and a husband who cherished her to prove it. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming one of the most respected horse training operations in Idaho. Samuel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's gift with horses, while Emma developed a sharp business mind that would eventually help expand the ranch even further. James, the youngest, inherited his mother's warm heart and his father's steady courage, growing into someone both parents were immensely proud of. Patricia and Benjamin grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. They weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, supported each other through illness and loss, and celebrated every milestone and achievement of their children, and eventually their grandchildren. When people in Boys told the story of Patricia Cole, they did not remember her as the woman whose first husband had called her barren and worthless. They remembered her as a successful rancher, a devoted mother, and one half of one of the most enduring love stories the town had ever seen. They remembered her courage in leaving a bad marriage and her wisdom in choosing a good one. They remembered her kindness, her strength, and the way she and Benjamin had built something beautiful together out of pain and loss. And on warm summer evenings, when Patricia and Benjamin sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, surrounded by children and grandchildren and all the evidence of a life well lived, Patricia would sometimes catch Benjamin looking at her with the same expression he had worn that first night in the saloon. "What are you thinking?" she would ask, though she already knew. "I am thinking," Benjamin would say, taking her hand in his, "that walking into that saloon in Boys was the best decision I ever made. And I am thinking that every day I get to spend with you is a gift I will never take for granted." And Patricia would smile, squeezing his hand, knowing that she felt exactly the same way. Their story had not been simple or easy, but it had been theirs, and it had been worth every moment. From the ashes of her first marriage had risen something stronger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. A true partnership, a real family, and a love that would last not just a lifetime but beyond. This was not just a happy ending. It was a happy life, built one day at a time by two people who had been brave enough to believe they deserved better and patient enough to work for it. It was proof that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always the possibility of light, always the chance for a new beginning, always hope for those brave enough to reach for it. And in the end, that was the truth Patricia wanted her children and grandchildren to remember, that you were never too broken to be loved, never too damaged to deserve happiness, and never too old to start over. All you needed was courage, hope, and maybe a cowboy walking through the doors of your life at exactly the right moment to remind you of the truth you had forgotten. You were never what cruel people said you were. You were who you knew yourself to be in your heart. And Patricia knew, beyond any shadow of doubt, that she was loved, valued, and cherished. She was brave and beautiful, just as Benjamin had told her all those years ago, and she always would be.